we now want to move to the last technical session of our consultation. And in this session, we speak to financing the fortification initiatives on the continent. So we have a session where we want to listen to technical and financial partners' commitment to food fortification in Africa. This session will be moderated by Dr. Rolf Klein, and Dr. Rolf Klein is the Vice President of Helen Keller International and has over 25 years professional experience in international public health nutrition, with expertise that spans nutrition effectiveness, research and design, management and evaluations of programs. So Dr. Klein, you have the floor to moderate this session where we expect or we look forward for more commitment from our technical and development and financial partners to food fortification on the continent. Dr. Klein, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the government of Côte d'Ivoire, SUR and the World Food Program for inviting me to moderate this session. And good morning and good day to the distinguished guests and participants. This is the last session before the conclusions and recommendations. But it's said that sometimes we leave the best for last. I have no doubt that this is the case for our exciting panel and esteemed panelists. We have four distinguished discussants: a plant geneticist who also is an agricultural policy expert, a person with boots in the ground who has now risen to the ranks of chief nutritionist for one of the larger donors in the world, an engineer who has been at the helm of innovation in the milling world, and a molecular biologist who represents now the largest producer and supplier of vitamins and premixes in the world. You will have their introductions on the webpage, so I'm going to keep their introductions very brief. The first speaker is Martin Vergine, who is the Director of Agriculture and Agri-Food at the African Development Bank. He is a plant geneticist and policy expert. That's a wonderful combination. He developed the first molecular genetic map of cassava. He served in very senior positions within the Ministry of Agriculture in Nigeria and with the Bio-Cassava Project under the Danforth Center. The second speaker is no stranger to Africa or to fortification, Sean Baker. Sean serves as the Chief Nutritionist for USAID, was the first Director of Nutrition at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I know him best as a colleague who served with Helen Keller for almost 2 decades, mostly in Africa. An interesting fact about Sean is that he originally trained in brain biology. Our third speaker is Ashish Pandey, who is the Managing Director and Senior Vice President at Crown Edogote Mills, Olam, Nigeria. Crown Flour Mill has been in the wheat milling business in Nigeria for over 4 decades. And Ashish is an engineer by training and has worked in numerous countries. An interesting fact about Ashish is that he loves to cook, and I assume he also enjoys eating. Our fourth and final speaker is Yannick Foing, who is the Global Director for Nutrition Improvement at DSM in the Netherlands. He was trained as a molecular biologist and in public health and social impact strategy. And he joined DSM 9 years ago and drove DSM's program in food fortification and supplementation in Asia Pacific. An interesting tidbit about Yannick is he is the father of two-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, and is an avid volcano climber. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to present. Please write your questions in the chat box, and we will direct your questions to the speakers after they've all presented. Over to you, Martin Vergine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rolf Clem, and I hope you can all hear me. And this is a topic that is very dear to my heart. I spent 4 years of my career at the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center in St. Louis, Missouri, working on food fortification, especially biofortification. And before that, also at SEPTEMBRE, I also worked very hard. So I really, this is a very dear topic to my heart. I'll be talking today on 4 topics in the 10 minutes I have. I will begin by talking about the burden of malnutrition in Africa. It's real. Then I will talk about some real success stories on the African continent to combat malnutrition. Then I'll talk about what the bank is doing, the innovative financing that we all would like to hear about today, what the bank is doing currently, and what the bank has planned to do. We're actually working very hard on a new facility, what we call the financing facility for food and nutrition in Africa. So I'll talk about that also briefly. But let's begin with the burden of malnutrition. I'm sure you've heard a lot during this last 2 days. But the truth is, malnutrition remains a leading driver of death and disability in Africa, particularly among children. The triple burden of malnutrition, stunting, wasting, obesity, leads to all sorts of non-communicable diseases that actually reduces the life or the productivity of many people, particularly children. The most recent estimates by UNICEF, the WHO, show that 79 million African children under the age of 5 are stunted, while 12 million are wasted, and 10.6 million children are overweight. That is really high for any continent to actually deal with, because the burden of this malnutrition is going to be felt down the road. Also, vitamin A deficiency affects 20% of pregnant women and 30% of children under the ages of in Africa. Poor quality diet accounts for 20% of all babies in Africa. Very, very high numbers. And at the continental level, as I said earlier, some African countries are really tackling it. The recent Malabo Montpellier panel actually did a report on nutrition in 2017, and they revealed that 7 countries, based on the Global Hunger Index, Senegal, Ghana, Rwanda, Togo, Angola, and Ethiopia, have substantially reduced the level of malnutrition. There's some real good stories coming out of Africa, but this is based upon clear policy, and also is based upon clear investments, and it's based upon clear measuring of results. For example, Ethiopia, and the infant and young child feeding program of Ethiopia that was implemented between 2010 and 2014, the program reached 60 million children under the age of 2 and developed large-scale models that can be replicated anywhere in the world. Same also in Mozambique and Uganda. That the very vigorous spread of orange flesh sweet potatoes in those countries by the Center for International Potato Research led to 68% of them households adopting orange flesh sweet potatoes, and this led to a doubling of vitamin A intakes. Very, very good news. And also the consumption of vitamin A, rich orange flesh sweet potatoes reduce the prevalence of and duration of diarrhea among children. Some really good news. We also have all that good news coming out of that report, but I won't go through all that now. We'll focus on what this panel is about, which is how can we get innovative financing to scale up the success stories that has been so well described by the MAMO panel report. First of all, I will talk about what the African Development Bank is doing right now and what we plan to do in the near future. First of all, the bank recognizes malnutrition as a major obstacle to human and economic development on the continent. Yeah, poor nutrition actually leads to, is responsible for half of children deaths in Africa and costs the region about 11% of GDP, very high number. So the bank launched what we call a multi-sectoral nutrition action plan in 2018. It was supposed to run for a total of 7 years. And that plan actually has four pillars. The first pillar was to mainstream nutrition into all our portfolios and pipelines, to ensure that all our portfolios and pipelines are actually nutrition friendly. We must include a KPI for nutrition in all our portfolios and pipelines of lending. Also, increase the production and consumption of safe and nutritious food through partnership with regional member countries, and also organizations like GAIN. I'm glad that Dr. Lawrence Haddad is participating here. And then the third pillar was to encourage member countries to prioritize smart nutrition and programs and actually borrow to implement them. So the program has some very ambitious targets to include 50% of investments in the health sector covering nutrition, 50% of investments in the agricultural sector also is targeted to nutrition, 50% in the water and sanitation, sector, also 15% covering targeted to nutrition, and 10% of social protection investment. It was a very, very bold plan, and it's been implemented. But lately, agriculture, and we all agree that you cannot talk about nutrition without talking about agriculture, because in many respects, agriculture and nutrition go hand in hand. Nutrition comes from food, and agriculture is about producing, distributing, and marketing food. So we launched a Feed Africa strategy in 2016. That's the bank, and we decided that we're going to put nutrition front and center of that strategy. So the very first pillar of the strategy, called Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, or TAT, actually was supposed to take the best technologies, including biofortified crops such as orange flex sweet potatoes, high iron beans, high iron, high zinc rice, and then things like vitamin A rich maize. We're going to take it and deliver it to farmers along with other technologies like heat tolerance, wheat varieties or drought tolerant maize varieties. A total of 40 million farmers. That was launched eventually in 2018, and so far we have recorded some pretty good success, particularly with high iron beans in the Great Lakes of Africa. We estimate that today at least 400,000, working through the leaders of the High Iron Bean Compact, which is SEPTEMBRE, the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. We have reached about 400,000, farmers with seeds of those high iron beans. Same stories have also been recorded for orange flex sweet potatoes, and then high orange high beta-carotene maize. That has really done some really good work, and we're trying to expand it in the second and third phase to reach many more people with this really nutrient-dense crops that will help to reduce, the prevalence of micronutrient deficiency in young people. Another program the bank has launched to combat malnutrition is the African Leaders for Nutrition. This is a high-level political engagement platform to advocate, among African leaders for urgent intervention to reverse the malnutrition crisis in Africa. ALN works with influential leaders, mostly previous African heads of states and serving African heads of states, to promote dialogue with other heads of state and ministers of finance as nutrition champions to accelerate the progress towards achieving, continental and nutrition targets. The ALN also has a scorecard for each country to see how each country is doing, and then use that, as a peer review mechanism, peer pressure mechanism to actually get leaders to invest in nutrition and also measure carefully the result of those investments. It's not enough to just invest, we have to measure carefully. And in wrapping up, I'll talk about two things. First of all, the first thing is some of our nutrition work, that's embedded in our learning programs, and I will finally conclude with our financing facilities for food and nutrition that I talked about initially. So, for example, in Ethiopia, we have a multi-sector approach for reduction of stunt, and this project will train and provide seeds and certified seeds and seedlings of high iron beans, cowpeas, mung beans, high quality protein maize, pigeon pea, amaranth, quinoa, orange flesh sweet potatoes, among many others, and very nutritious vegetables and pulses, for thousands of farmers, in areas where you have severe, malnutrition in Ethiopia. We are very proud of this program that was recently approved by our board. It has been implemented. I believe that such targeted and also focused, initiatives funded by the country themselves, will lead to and increase nutritional outcomes. And this is promoting biofortification, in the Belia region. This is part of a larger project. That's a project that seeks to, improve processing. But
Martin,
this project
one more minute.
actually is similar to Ethiopia, high nutrient. Okay. So let me just go fund for agriculture. If I respond to the request for African leaders to have a financing facility for food and nutrition to provide, and we do three things, nutritious food, access to nutritious food, that's high on beans and things I've spoken before, vegetables, fruits. We will try also to support small and medium processors who make nutrient-dense food. Very important. Again, has shown that they are probably the most important, actors to be able to get nutritious food to small children. And then lastly, we will try to, to use this research to strengthen food systems, both the production, distribution, and marketing. Let me stop here. Thank you very much, Ralph. And like I said, the topic of very dear to my heart.
Thank you, Martin. We certainly can hear the passion and energy and from the insights that you've shared. So thank you very much. Now turning to Sean Baker, the Chief Nutritionist for USAID.
Thank you, Rolf. I'd like to start off by again reiterating my thanks to the government of the Côte d'Ivoire, to SUR, to the African Union, West African Health Organization, and the World Food Program for welcoming me here today. And as you'd said in my beginning, Rolf, most of my career has actually been in Africa, so to me it's an incredible pleasure to be back here with this opportunity to present. And I want to share a few slides with you about my own personal reflections on large-scale food fortification, and then share with you some of the plans of both current work and future work of the U.S. Agency for International Development. I am now having a slight bit of problem getting my slides to show. I had tried to make sure I was able to do this yesterday. And thank you. So are you able to present for me?
Sean, I can try to present if you want to go ahead and get started. Oh, there, we can see them now.
Okay, good. Well, I'm making some progress here. Excellent. All right, thank you so much. The next slide. So, and I really want to focus in my comments on large-scale food fortification. I think during the last 2 days, we've talked about different ways of solving micronutrient malnutrition, but I want to focus in on large-scale food fortification or industrial fortification because it has some key aspects, I think, some unique features we really need to hone in on. I think, as others have stated, it has incredible proven track record over 100 years through saltitization of actually changing the status, nutritional status of vulnerable populations at scale. And this works in low, middle, and high income countries at very low costs. It's also quite unique that unlike so many of the public health programs we do for nutrition, the recurrent costs are, once these are up and running, mainly covered by the industries themselves and the consumers. I think that, and we've seen it during this pandemic, we've seen it in the global food price crisis, that it's incredibly important to ensure what I call this safety net of essential vitamins and minerals in the food supply, so that when the poorer households are buffeted and can't afford safe, affordable, nutritious food, at the very minimum, we're ensuring these essential micronutrients. It is also quite unique in nutrition that we're really not asking consumers to change behaviors. And I think making sure fortification is mandatory so that the food that to fortify that have been chosen by the government, everybody is fortifying them, takes the burden away from consumers to try to sort out what's fortified, what's not. And it also reduces costs because we don't need to invest in behavior change. It's also, I think, important as we look in general a trend towards more centralized processing of cereal flours, other processed foods, and of course, increasing urbanization. Large-scale food fortification is going to have more and more impact over time and become increasingly relevant. Moving on to the next slide.
Can we have the next slide, please?
Yes, just one moment.
Great. So now I've put these, what I see as the key steps to achieving large-scale food fortification in sequential order. But of course, there's an iterative cycle here. But I think when we look across the board, the single failing in fortification is we've not chosen our food vehicles correctly. So we've not looked at understanding populations at risk of micronutrient malnutrition. What are they consuming that is fortified, and make sure we're making the smart selections of the food vehicles. And then next, moving to the industries who are actually processing those foods, working with them to assess their capacities, understand what support they need. And of course, then you need to put into place the standards that meet the public health requirements, and then also create the legal framework to move towards mandatory fortification. And then, and this is where the bulk of the work actually is, supporting the industries to ensure the production of food to those mandates and ensuring the quality control necessary. Because if the industries are on board and the industries have the capacities, the bulk of the control system is really then in place. Now, while I said that we don't need a big focus on behavior change, it is also, however, important to make sure consumers are informed and supportive of it, and give industry credit for the incredible contributions they are making to the public health of populations. And we see that sustained advocacy from groups like consumers associations, can be, other civil society organizations, could be really important to make sure that fortification remains on top of the agenda and continues to get political will. And of course, as all programs, we need to continue to monitor and evaluate. And here, particularly the public sector has an incredibly important role to make sure that the aspirations set out in the fortification program are being met. And then also adjust over time, because food consumption patterns are changing. There may be new opportunities of vehicles to fortify. And how do you iterate and adjust? I think perhaps one of the errors we made in the past is assuming we set the standards in place and they can just run for decades. Well, of course, science changes, consumer behaviors change, and I think that ongoing cycle of adjustment. What is not explicit here, and I thank you, Martin, for mentioning the Africa Leaders for Nutrition, because I think it's a great illustration, of course. Part of the magic that brings us all together is the political leadership that keeps the attention to nutrition generally and to fighting micronutrient malnutrition specifically. If I could go to the next slide, please. Some of these lessons learned I've already referred to. I would reiterate, and I think it's been laid out with the Food Systems Summit with Nutrition for Growth, building back for the pandemic, this is more relevant now than ever to secure micronutrient security in the food system. I think it was strongly mentioned during some of the sessions I attended yesterday that you need to have people on the ground who understand fortification, who are juggling the parts, who wake up every day to make sure that this really is going to go on. A huge lesson, of course, and this came across very strongly in the Nigeria presentation yesterday, is that we all need to remember it's the industry that's fortifying. So we often need to take a look at all of the industry's needs, not perhaps just the technical needs for fortification, but what are the needs to support to keep these industries thriving. Obviously, this requires a partnership across multiple sectors, the government, industry, technical partners, donor partners, and civil society. And those basic skills of understanding and respecting points of view of different, and acknowledging contributions and maintaining open, transparent, and frequent communications are essential. I really enjoyed a lot of yesterday's discussion, and I think the fact that this is held under the auspices both of the African Union and the West African Health Organization is so important, because what we've seen, I think, particularly in Africa, but also in Central America, is an incredibly strong synergy between that regional enabling environment, how you can bring together a regional trade agenda with a regional public health agenda. And it's not either or, it's really how does that regional level work and that national level work come together. Also, that industries are the foremost champions. But my experience is that when you speak directly to the CEOs of these industries, they will be your primary champions in advancing large-scale food fortification. And they're really looking for a level playing field to avoid some of the non-compliance that some actors can play. And then, as I said in my prior slide, it does require being iterative and building in flexibility and adjusting over time as conditions on the ground change. Now moving specifically to USAID, if I could have the next slide, and hopefully I think my last.
One more minute, Sean, if you can.
Yeah, sure, yes. So at USAID, we have over 40 years of experience in large-scale food fortification, starting particularly with salt iodization. And we recognize the partnerships that need to come together. What we're doing now is really repositioning large-scale food fortification as an essential food systems action. It comes at an opportune time because across the US government, we are refreshing the global food security strategy, which underpins Feed the Future, and positioning a focus on improving diets. And within improving diets, positioning large-scale food fortification as a non-negotiable action in the food system. And so we currently have out a request for information that many of you will have seen as we're working through what mechanisms we will put into place. We've developed a results framework and a programming guide for our missions, because the bulk of our financial resources are managed by our missions in country and who can be really strong partners in advancing the food fortification agenda. And it's really reaching out to new parts of USAID and agricultural development and economic growth who historically have not been involved in fortification, so that they understand that this is an essential part of food systems actions. So again, thank you so much, everyone, and back over to you, Rolf.
Thank you so much, Sean. I do have to ask about that one beautiful smile on that child in the one slide you had on key elements of achieving large-scale food fortification. And I think one of the pieces that you've highlighted is that industry fortifies and the others facilitate. To me, this is really critical. And the question becomes, how do we facilitate that and recognize industry for the contributions that they're making to decreasing or eliminating hidden hunger? Okay, our third speaker, Ashish Pandey, who's our engineer and from a large miller in Nigeria. Over to you, Ashish.
Hi, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invite and thanks for hearing me out. So I'm going to share my slide. Yep. Can you see my slide?
Yes, perhaps you can put it in slide mode so it gets a little bit bigger. Perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you see it now? Is it fine?
Yeah, I think it'll be fine. Yes.
Okay. So, so basically, Olam, I work with Olam, and Olam is a large miller in Nigeria. We have the biggest milling operation in Africa, and I believe that we have really been following this fortification agenda very, very closely and very strongly. And what we have is basically 5 enablers or 5 big pillars how we try to drive food fortification. The first and the most important being that we have a state-of-the-art premix facility. So this facility is basically, it's a fully automated facility where we are the only miller in Africa to have this equipment with us, or this facility with us. In this case, we are able to quantify exactly what micronutrient we like to put inside our premix, and therefore each element, for example, vitamin A, B, zinc, whatever it might be, is at the source is bought from us, and then we ensure that we have the right kind of mixing and ensuring the right quality of final premix is produced in-house for our fortification of our flour and fortification of our pasta. Also, by default, of course, we follow all the norms, so it's 100% compliant to all the norms of NAFDAC, SON and SON standards. We also spend a lot of time, effort, and of course money and resources in terms of manpower for education, consumer education, which is actually the key for us. We go out to various bakery forums, bakery sessions. We have our own baking school, whereas we then teach and coach these bakers and tell them nutritional benefits of flour, of our flour, and also nutritional benefits of various breads which are produced by them. So therefore, they also are able to further educate down the line to the end consumers. And therefore, this is a very important tool, because you don't have an access to end consumer, since it's not a packaged product, but you have and these people in between, the bakers, are very, very important, because they are the key influencers in terms of communication passing down the line. The fourth point, of course, is leveraging the best global practices. So we work with international partners, national and international partners, be it TechnoServe. With the help of TechnoServe and with the help of GAIN, we've been able to develop the state-of-the-art facility. So therefore, we also reach out to international people, and we're able to get the best new trends, etc., and seek new technologies to further, improve us in this regard. The last part, of course, is the new product development or the NPDs. As I was talking about pasta, it's very difficult to have a nutritional sort of pasta or fortified pasta per se, because while when you're cooking pasta in the machine per se, you end up losing a lot of nutritional value. But what we are trying to do is that by way of improving our process, a lot of brand, which actually by further refining it and processing it can go back into the pasta. That makes the pasta much more nutritious. It makes it much more filled with much more natural nutrition, and also adds a lot of fiber. So it's like a win-win for us. Also, it's a win for the end consumer. By the way, bran is also a kind of a byproduct, which of course is sold differently. But we said that, if you're able to give back something to our consumers by doing this NPD. So we are right now in the final stages, and we're just doing a testing in terms of the bite and the feel and the taste for the consumers. And hopefully, I think the product would be really good, which the consumers also will like, and at the same point of time will be nutritious too. The second slide is more in terms of, defining and just giving a little bit of more in-depth view of a premix facility. As you can see, it's a standard facility. By the same point of time, you have an RM intake, you have mixing, you have automated systems, and to get it to the end part, which is basically packing. It's a fully automated end-to-end automation. It is also GMP compliant. At the same point of time, we have an app by which we can track the various parameters at the mixing stage itself. So therefore, what is the kind of premix finally we are producing? Each batch is consistent, and it is driven more by the technology, with the help of technology. It's not manual from that point of view. That's again, I think, one of a kind in Nigeria, for at least. Last but not the least, I was talking about the education part. I say we've been driving education, nutritional awareness all around our bakers, and bakers are important. So therefore, what we do is that we tell them in terms of, our logo being a micronutrients for life. So which are vitamin A, iron, vitamin A, zinc, iron, many of these. And then we actually teach them in terms of what each deficiency does to a particular person, and therefore why it is required, what and how our products really help in terms of fulfilling that particular nutritional gap. So I think these things really go a long way and help the consumers. And we've been doing this for the last 2 years now, 2.5, 3 years now. As we go forward, we look for more active participation with the industry, also with the experts, more open to get a lot of views and a lot of suggestions as to how we can be better in doing this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashish. I think we've seen from your presentation the innovation of the private sector, but also the need for engineering, supplies, the premix itself, sensors, and so forth to have quality products. And again, these are ways we need to think about how can we facilitate the private sector to make the contributions that it can towards ending hidden hunger. So thank you very much. Our fourth and final speaker is Yannick Foy from DSM. Yannick, over to you.
Thank you, Rolf. Bonjour à tous. Je tiens d'abord à remercier le gouvernement de Côte d'Ivoire, le PAM et le CERFAM pour cette invitation à cet événement très important. I'll carry on in English if you allow me. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So DSM is a global science-based and purpose-led company which is active in health, nutrition, and sustainable living. And the core focus of the team that I'm leading is public health nutrition. And we are mainly supporting in 3 areas: staple food fortification, obviously, topic of the day, and DSM in particular pioneered the technology to fortify rice through hot extrusion. And we are still very much involved across the world in initiatives aiming at scaling up rice fortification. We are also supportive with innovative product solutions in public health supplementation, like MNPs, MMS, but also as well in emergency and therapeutic foods. Next slide, please. Thank you. And we work very closely with multiple partners, including WFP, UNICEF, World Vision, as well as donors and governments to really provide technical expertise and also potential product innovations. Just to give you an idea, I mean, for instance, we've been partnering with World Food Programme since 2007. And the way we partner together is that we combine the technical expertise in micronutrients from DSM together with the extensive delivery mechanisms from WFP, and we focus on countries with high level of deficiencies. And from the inception of the partnership in 2007, both partners' expertise combined made it possible to improve the nutritional value of the WFP food basket, if you think about MNP, super cereal, but also fortified rice as well. And together, we were able to reach in 2020 over 30 million beneficiaries with these improved and co-created products through the partnership. And in addition, I mean, WFP and DSM work jointly to increase availability, demand for, and also consumption of nutritious foods in retail and open market. And I think that resonates pretty well with the statement from Sean and Rolf. I mean, we are industry and we fortify, but we need help from WFP and others to ensure that our nutrients can reach people who need them the most. Next slide, please. So I'll be talking a bit about product innovation and how can we use innovation to generate more impact through large-scale staple food fortification. And I'll be showing just a couple of innovation areas that we believe are still very much at the exploratory stage, but are indeed very relevant for malnutrition. First, I mean, if you look at gut health or microbiome here, I mean, it's well known already that gut bacteria produce vitamins, and they also promote the absorption of minerals in the gut. And when you have an altered microbiota composition, it has been clearly linked to malnutrition. So a healthy gut environment is pretty much variety or diversity of microbes. And to really reach diversity, prebiotics and probiotics has been shown to help. Of course, I mean, as I said, it's very much exploratory, especially linked to malnutrition, but we believe there will be some interesting results in the coming years, so watch this space. We could also be looking in the role of immune nutrients, and here I'm talking about vitamin A, vitamin E, D, or zinc, to really help to prevent systemic inflammation, which is, of course, I mean, very relevant in the times that we are living. Last, and here we are not talking specifically about fortified staples, but rather at vehicles like RUTF, RUSF, and LNS. There's a lot of evidence which are showing the role of amino acids, also arachidonic acid in growth and development, as well as the role of essential fatty acids like DHA in cognition for children, for instance. If you move to the second bucket, how can we leverage today technology and in particular digitalization to really address issues like QA/QC, for instance, so that we are able to track and trace fortification from production, from the premix of the stretch production, all the way to the consumer level, and also to track the consumption of fortified food. I won't spend too much time on this because I believe it's been discussed already today, but that's definitely an interesting area for innovation. We could also look at ways that innovation can help to create demand from consumers as well, obviously. If you look at mobile phones, which are overage. If you look at diagnostics tools as well, I think we should be looking more and more, and there are companies already investing in this space, to develop portable, disposable, affordable, cheap, smart and connected diagnostic tools, which can really measure micronutrients level. And then, of course, the data would be able to enable governments to understand better the population nutritional status and design then the adequate intervention, obviously. Last bucket around innovative ways to integrate nutrients and also new vehicles to be fortified. We can look, for instance, at enzymes, which can help to degrade anti-nutrients and therefore can also improve the absorption of key nutrients like iron and zinc in the fight against malnutrition. I won't go into details of every single enzyme, but we believe, and we are not the only ones, obviously, that specifically phytase has a huge potential, as it's been demonstrated that phytase degrade phytate, of course, which helps in terms of minerals absorption, like zinc or iron, for instance. And if you look in terms of application, more research needs to be done indeed, but it could potentially be added into porridges, maize-based product, whole grain flours, and even condiments like bouillon or soy sauce, for instance. Next, if you look at new potential vehicles to fortify, fortified rice is not new, obviously, here, as you heard before, but it clearly needs to be scaled up. And through multiple platforms, including retail as well. And we heard about Olan before. And in terms of innovation around fortified rice, we could also look at adding new nutrients like vitamin D, which is key for immunity, but also at innovative distribution channels. And a few companies already started to sell fortified rice kernels in sachet, pretty much similar to MNPs, I would say. And these fortified rice kernels in sachet can be blended at home by the consumer. And here it's quite important because we need to meet the consumer where they are and with what they want, for instance, as long as the product remains affordable for them, obviously. and over fortified vehicles we could be looking into, using the same type of extrusion technology to fortify rice, pulses like lentils. They are widely consumed in South Asia and also in certain parts of Africa and Latin America, I believe. So that could be an interesting vehicle to fortify. Next slide, please. And here, I mean, just to wrap up, I mean, looking at innovations not around product, but rather around channels and also business models as well. If you look at vaccination, there are quite few recent studies which show that nutrition is one of the possible factors influencing the effectiveness of the COVID vaccine. We should be looking probably for ways to ensure that people who are getting vaccinated are also getting the right nutrition through fortification of staples, for instance, because evidence shows that it will probably make the response to the vaccine quicker, more robust, and also more long-lasting. So maybe an interesting connection to explore here. School feeding, I mean, of course, nothing new here. I think everyone knows that school feeding is a great way to fill the nutrients gap and also to boost children's immune systems. But we need to ensure that we are not only feeding children, but nourishing them with nutrients-packed school meals, for instance. And here, I mean, we have plenty of examples already of school meals using fortified staples, like fortified rice, in multiple countries in Asia, like India, and soon in West Africa and in other parts of Africa. Also, if you look at innovative business model and innovative financing mechanisms to reach consumers. So at DSM, I mean, we have invested in several ventures, sometimes with public sector partners, for instance, to really develop affordable and aspirational fortified product for the consumer. And one example is Africa Improved Foods, which is a public-private partnership between DSM, the government of Rwanda, and donors, and which is producing a range of fortified products in Rwanda. So it's feeding Africa from Africa. And until now, it's reached 1.6 million of consumers, contributed to the creation of 300 jobs, and is sourcing raw materials like maize from over 130,000 smallholder farmers from the region. So it contributes also to local economic development. Last innovation pillar, I would say, workforce nutrition. We all know that good nutrition is a key driver for both healthy lives, but also for healthy businesses. But still, what we see today is that poor diet on the job is costing countries around the world up to 20% in lost productivity. It's massive. So if you invest in workforce nutrition programs, finding a way to combine access to fortified products, like fortified rice, for instance, to nutrition education, it's clearly a win-win for organizations, employers, and employees as well. And I'm seeing work coming up, so I'm going to wrap up quickly. And we have plenty of examples showing that, indeed, I mean, workforce nutrition is actually an interesting channel. So just to wrap up, Rolf, if you allow me, I just want to finish by saying, let's not forget the consumer or the beneficiary. We are talking here about fortified staples as a nutrition intervention, but most importantly, it's food. And wherever we innovate, we need to start from the consumer. What do they want? How much can they pay for whenever the cost is passed on to the consumer? Do they understand the benefits of fortification as well? And I think it's particularly important as we are seeing during the pandemic that more and more consumers from the lower part of the economic pyramid are turning towards staple food. So the consumption of fortified staples could be increasing and could have a huge impact on public health here. Over to you, Rolf. Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick, and thank you to all the panelists. I'd like to pick up on the last point and address a question perhaps, and that is the focus on the consumer, which I think is really important, and I think the private sector does an extraordinary job of. But my question here is, we talk about hidden hunger, that the manifestations are not obvious. It's not easy to see and look at something on my skin or in my eyes or my mouth that I actually need these nutrients. And so I guess my question, maybe to the wider group, but particularly Yannick, is, you know, this is a dilemma. How does one think about addressing or thinking about the consumer when the issues are not manifest to them, and if they eat a fortified product, things don't automatically show a benefit? So I'm going to just leave that open to maybe to the panelists to discuss. Over.
I can start on that, Rolf. It's a great question indeed. I mean, because as you say, I mean, nutrition at the end is not sexy, if you allow me the term, and it's hard to show the benefits, right? And if you look at staple food fortification, it's what we call low-grade fortification, and it takes time to show improvement, and consumers are not seeing the impact. It's not like when you take antibiotics, you feel better after a couple of days, right? So here is how do we get data? How do we get good quality data to be able to understand what should the staples be fortified with to make sure that we actually target the local efficiencies, for instance. And then, I mean, it's, I would say, a combination of SBCC, behavior change, and ensuring that consumers are kept in the loop, are kept informed about the benefits of fortification. And here, I think it's a collaborative effort that need to happen. Indeed, it's not, I don't think it's only the role of the private sector to educate consumers. You're right, their role to play. But I think, as you said, I mean, we are here to fortify. We need help to ensure that we get facilitation so that the nutrients can reach people who need them the most. So.
Thank you. Any comments from others? Sean, I see you've put your camera on.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. My reflection, I do think it's one of the unique features of large-scale food fortification. And if you look at the history of saltization, we have a huge amount to learn. That huge efforts to get consumers, particularly consumers the most at risk of deficiencies, to choose between a fortified versus a non-fortified product really have not been the answer. It's been having that mandatory fortification. The government is saying, look, these are the essential micronutrient deficiencies we need to address. To do that by matching up what people are eating with what's fortifiable. Let's make sure we're mandating that fortification, but then working hand in hand with the private sector so they're able to meet those standards. And that's not say that, and because I think it's unlike, I think, more complex nutrition behaviors such as breastfeeding, complementary feeding, et cetera, where you do need very significant individualized behavior change as well as systemic behavior change. I think for fortification, you want to make sure the consumers are aware of it to avoid any misperceptions. But from what I think it's more those organized consumer voices, such as consumers associations, that can be important as key champions to say, look, this is an essential part of what the food industry and government need to deliver, and how do we make sure they're accountable for doing so? Because as you said, Rolf, particularly for these micronutrient deficiencies, they're not the same signs as if you understand. I mean, families immediately see the improvements of exclusive breastfeeding, for example. You don't have these instant feedback loops for a lot of the vitamin and mineral interventions. Over.
Yeah, I very much resonate with that view in that we struggle with behavior change, all of us, even individually, to make changes in behavior, because these behaviors, particularly regarding food, are ingrained from the moment we're born in many cases, or as we grow up. And so I think you've really highlighted the value of a level playing field, mandatory large-scale food fortification, and the other products which are more voluntary. That again can be, you know, those are consumer choices, and consumers can choose those that to pay more if they want, or to choose better. And I think that's where the consumer education is needed. Thank you for that. So the topic of this session was technical and financial partners' commitments. So I want to raise a question to the panelists. I mean, all of the organizations that you represent have made commitments, both technically and financially, to food fortification. What do you think needs to change from the way either that technical support or financial commitment is made, is channeled? So I just want to raise that as a question, because the need is still there. But what should change about how it's delivered, the way it gets channeled? Over to the panelists.
since nobody else is jumping in, Rolf, I'll go ahead and take a first stab at that. When I think of, to try to really summarize what I see as the three big gaps in fortification, I think about a performance gap, design gap, and a food technology gap. The performance gap, I think, and it's been to me incredibly reassuring to see how many countries in Africa do have mandatory fortification on the books. But if you look at the data where they're available, there's still a big gap between those mandates and what's actually being delivered. So I think our first thing to do is how do we close that performance gap? I think the illustration from Nigeria yesterday was brilliant of, go to the highest authorities of the food industry, get them on board, make sure the government is having that dialogue, say, look, we're on this together. This is doable. This is best global practice. Let's make sure we're able to fortify the mandate. Then the second one, and of course they're iterative, is what I call the design gap, because I think, and I believe other panelists have mentioned this, is that we need to make sure we're fortifying people, the products that are being consumed by people at risk of micronutrient malnutrition. And so investing in that, relooking at and I think overall we've seen we don't have enough dietary intake data. Now, you don't need extraordinary dietary intake data because this is not a micro finely tuned intervention, but having updated data. And I think that's where certainly governments have to have routine collection of consumption data that can guide fortification policy. And then I call it the food technology gap, because I do think, and there have been some interesting developments, but we've tended to be a bit complacent about the usual nutrients and usual food vehicles, and not saying, okay, well, if the only food vehicle perhaps that's getting out that's fortifiable is salt, are there ways that we can stack other nutrients on it? So how can we really use the magic of food technology to make further improvements? And so I think that those investments in the innovation. But I think the understanding that this is not something you just set a legislative mandate and it just happens, but how do you identify just the key structures that need to happen and have a long-term investment plan? And these are not high-cost investments, they're catalytic investments. Over.
Very, very insightful. And I like the way you categorize the gaps: performance, technology, and design. And the thing about catalytic investments, because once that catalyst has been provided, in many cases, the private sector takes it forward. Other reflections on that question? Yannick, I see you wanted to say something, and I also want to invite both Ashish and Martin.
Well, thanks, Rolf. I mean, I think if you look at one of the bottlenecks today, it's about access, right? And in order to make fortified staple accessible to the largest number and to expand the reach, we need to ensure that we are working closely with local millers, local traders as well. And in order to really convince them to embrace food fortification, I think we need to make sure that fortification is a no-brainer for them. Meaning they are our customers, they are our partners. And if you look at quality control, for instance, very often they have to send a sample of fortified flour from Africa to Europe or to the US to get analyzed because there is no local analytical capabilities. It costs money, takes time, So I think all this needs to change somehow. Can we look into investing into developing to strengthening the local quality control system, for instance, maybe even at regional level? That will really help to get more local players on board and then to be able to reach much further, I would say.
Thank you. Ashish or Martin?
Yeah, hi. So from the way I see it, I would say that, in a developing market like Nigeria, I'm taking example of Nigeria, it's very difficult to, for a manufacturer, to invest in technology, etc., because a market like this, when it's the basic things are not really available, nobody will give you any, upgrade to a higher, more fortified food. So you can do whatever you can do at a very basic level. And unfortunately, you can't go beyond that. So that's like one disenabler, I would say, which comes from an inherent, the way the market is. To me, I would segment this in 3 different, axes. One, of course, is getting the right infrastructure, which at least from our side, we made a humble beginning with the help of TechnoServe, and we've been able to, get a premix dedicated facility. So getting the infrastructure is very critical as to how would you provide the benefit. The second part is technology, which I think a lot of stuff can be done in terms of sharing of data, automation, precision, because in a market like Africa, these things really are really important. Each batch can be different because the predictability part needs to be governed by technology. So getting a good technology is very critical. Sharing of information and data is very critical. And the last and the most important pillar is communication. Investing in communication, investing in education. When you go down to bakers, you work with the bakers and work with them very tirelessly, to work and educate them the benefits of fortification, and bread being the cheapest carbohydrate option available in the country. You can imagine the kind of impact the bakeries can have on the larger set of people. While it is not very, how would I say, doesn't come very naturally to them, because when everybody's trying to fight for the basic food, one does not talk about the next level of order of needs, which is like how good my food is. So I think that needs to be pushed by us, as we have, I would say, the means to do it. And I think education is really the key. The least what we can do from my side is educate people.
Thank you. Any additional comments, Martin?
Yes. I just want to say that I kind of subscribe to the comments from Ashish and from also from Yannick and from Sean. But I just want to add one thing. In the countries that the Malabo panel has shown some real success, some real progress, policy plays a very important role, whether for large scale, food fortification, or for things like biofortification. The policy, and when I talk of policy, often there are sides, but I'm talking of the holistic policy that is supported by both both ministries, health and education. And that policy creates incentives, for what Ashish was talking about. If you accept to invest in equipment, the technologies to fortify food, the government should be able to offset some investments, either as tax holidays, policy incentives that actually, makes it attractive. And also down the chain, if you're a baker, if you are, if you use fortified, flour, there should be something that actually helps you, still make profit and remain in business. But the last thing I want to say about the policy, and especially on large-scale fortification, governments have to communicate, and Ashish mentioned this. Communication is probably the most important thing. It has to be clear. The audience has to be, well defined, and the message has to be very well defined, and then it has to be repeated. Otherwise, people just feel that, oh no, this thing, it is just a waste of time and money. It's not. It's not. The impact, the effect of malnutrition is real. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, in the closing moments of this session, I'm going to ask each of the speakers if they could offer, from their perspective, the one priority that they think would be make fortification a game changer in a country. What would that priority or investment, either in financial or technical support, be? I know there are many, but I'm going to ask you to each select which you think would be the key to making a major move forward. And I'll ask maybe if in the order of presenters. Martin, would you be able to provide your one priority? Martin, you might be on mute.
I'm trying to unmute myself. I'm sorry. Yeah, for me, if you're going to tell me one priority, you just take one priority, I'll probably say communication. Very clear and strong communication about the importance of the diversified food basket, importance of fortification, importance of breastfeeding, importance of food safety, communication. We should really invest in it. It's been overlooked for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean?
It's the political leadership. And I think it goes back to also what Martin was saying. I mean, so much of it are the right policies in place. Is the political will to implement those policies? And you know, from a donor's perspective, there's nothing we can do to substitute for a lack of political leadership. We work in partnership with our partner governments, and that is indispensable.
Okay, Ashish.
Yeah, I think, you know, as I was saying, yeah, it's important that education is the key. You know, education really sets people free. So I think the least which we can do is, first of all, educate people, you know, in terms of how important is fortification. And then everything else can be layered on top of it. I think that's a very easy thing to do. It's not very expensive if one does not want to do it in a large scale. But whatever you want to do, you know, make an impact.
Okay, and Yannick, we'll finish with you.
Sure, thanks, Rolf. I would have said education as well, but it's been taken already. So I would say collaboration. And I mean, it's a bit of an easy word, obviously, but it's really by having very strong public-private collaboration that we will be able to reach as many people as possible. So.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to reserve the right for just a couple of comments. I recall Sean Baker making a comment, not in this session, but previously, saying that malnutrition and hunger are both markers and makers of poverty. And on the flip side of that, ending hunger and malnutrition, including micronutrient malnutrition, is a marker and a maker of a more productive and prosperous future. And I think that's what has brought us all together to look at one important intervention among a mix that we've talked about. And the way I view things is there are two ways of taking things to scale. One is through the private sector. The other is through the public sector. And I think we've heard that fortification is clear and centered in the private sector, but the investments and the risks and the costs need to be offset by catalytic investments and by political leadership that enables that to happen. There are trade-offs, there are costs. There are costs to action, there are costs to inaction. And I think we need to take stock of those, because in many cases, the cost of inaction gets paid by those who are least able to pay the costs, and that is those who are already marginalized and deficient. So we have examples of public health successes that we've seen throughout this conference, where there have been measurable and tangible public health benefits. And I just want to thank the panel for sharing their thoughts on the technical and financial commitment to food fortification, and thank the organizers for allowing this session to take place. And I hand back 2 minutes from our session back to the overall organizers. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for this brilliant session on the commitment of technical and financial partners. And also thank you very much for the nice summary of the session. We are, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, we are at the end of the 2 days consultations, and I will not try to summarize the consultations. The moderators of sessions have done that better than I could have done. And I am also aware that there is a team of rapporteurs who is working behind the scene to put together the recommendations and the proceedings of these consultations. But before we close, I would like to invite Dr. Hamid Noor to present some quick recommendations that they have been able to capture, and more importantly, a communique. As we meet in the high-level consultation such as this one, it is important that when we leave, we agreed on 2 or 3 key things that we want to take away as commitment, high-level commitment from these high-level consultations. So Dr. Hamid will present the recommendation and this communicate to us in form of the conclusion of this meeting. Dr. Hamid is the director of WFP African Union Global Office and representative to the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Before he assumed his duty here in Nairobi, in Addis, he was a representative and the country director of WFP in Sudan, in India. And before he joined the WFP, he worked with the African Union. So, Dr. Noor, you have the floor at this point. But before you take the floor, Dr. Noor, with your permission, I have Mrs. Simon, who seems to have something very important to share with us. And I want exceptionally to give her the floor because she really wants to take the floor to say something. Mrs. Simon?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Alors, tout ce que nous avons pu entendre depuis hier, je crois que tout cela a suscité en nous beaucoup de réflexions. Et je voudrais souligner le fait que durant l'année 2020, vous savez bien que les entreprises ont eu des difficultés particulières et des projets qui devaient être financés n'ont pas pu le faire. Quelles dispositions aujourd'hui pour que ces entreprises puissent reprendre un élan, aller à l'échelle? Parce que le problème de la crise de malnutrition s'est aggravé et c'est devenu au niveau de nos pays de la sous-région. Et il est important que des activités assez solides, qui ont déjà fait leurs preuves, puissent être soutenues pour aller à l'échelle et permettre à la population qui n'a pas beaucoup d'argent, parce que le pouvoir d'achat est vraiment détruit, que les gens puissent eux aussi aller à cette alimentation pour leur survie. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Simon. Les différents panélistes qui sont ici et qui peuvent répondre à cette question, et je vais prier qu'ils puissent vous donner des réponses dans la boîte. Essayez de regarder dans la boîte à messages, puisqu'il y a plusieurs panélistes et cette question ne s'adresse pas à un seul. Donc, on va partager des idées sur ce qu'il faut faire pour que les entreprises qui ont souffert de la pandémie puissent reprendre à l'échelle. Donc, chers panélistes, veuillez partager avec nous des propositions, des suggestions pour que ces entreprises puissent reprendre. Merci beaucoup, madame. So with this, I want to call on Dr. Hamid for the conclusions and recommendations of this consultation. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simplice Nwala. And I hope you can hear me clearly, please.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Dr. Nwala, I have half an hour and I was going to take the extra 2 minutes from my predecessor, but it seems as if we are at the close and we need to try and see how we can wrap up quickly. I will try and do this. According to Dr. Ralph Klein, he said that the last is always the best. I'm not necessarily sure that this is exactly the case, but it's always the most difficult. especially when you are, I'm trying to wrap up things in terms of conclusions. Please, can we keep this slide off for now? This will not be the first slides which I'll have. I'll have the other PowerPoints first. So this can just be off and I'll just be talking initially, okay? It's a bit overwhelming really to put conclusions in place and recommendations because there has been such a high level of participation and activity going on over the last 2 days. And the presentations have been so in-depth, really, that almost every single presentation, and we've had about 33, 34, has got recommendations that we can pull out from there. There's a diverse level of participants, as we can see, from private sector to government to NGOs, civil society. And because the meeting also is virtual, it makes it difficult because we have to give feedback in real time as well. So I'm just going to say that we'll try and present what we have. And it's not just myself. We do have we do have a team consisting of rapporteurs who are members from the African Union Commission itself, from West African Health Organization, from WFP, from headquarters, from region, and from myself as well. So there's a team that have been trying to extract what has been going on throughout the whole 2 days of the conference. It's very clear. We are singing from the same hymn book. We are singing the same song. Different players in different areas, but we need to see now, how do we harmonize that song now in an orchestra where everybody's playing different instruments to put things forward in a positive way. I would like to refer to the objective of the conference, which is present in your conference notes. And in that, there was an overall objective of this consultation, which was to promote discussions and sharing of experiences and best practices among the different countries and actors involved in food fortification at the global, regional, and national levels in order to accelerate the fight against malnutrition in all its forms in Africa. Please keep that in the back of your mind because we have to see whether we have answered that question in the end. I'm not going to go through all the sessions. It was a wide variety. We looked at opening sessions where there was political involvement and commitments. There was also looking at things like the focus on micronutrient deficiencies, anemia, the state of food fortification in Africa, in the whole 3 sessions of that. And of course, we've wound up today now with the last session now, which has to do with financing institutions and technical institutions. In terms of looking at these recommendations and how to put them forward, there is a need for us to be as simple as possible because there are so many recommendations. Okay, because we have a terrible echo. Can technology please take care of that? Thank you. So we need to be as simple and practical as possible in terms of how we make these recommendations. However, there still needs to be a lot of work that's going to be done because we've had to extract from the chat boxes, from the question and answer boxes, from emails, and even WhatsApp messages that we've been getting in order to try and see how we can come up with some concrete recommendations. Some of the points that we had to ponder or considerations that we had to make, and in no particular order, were, for example, leadership and oversight. How do we push this forward? Who is going to lead us in this quest? How do we look at an institution or an entity that can help to support us in implementation of fortification? How do we address the various forms of fortification? Artificial, where you do addition, or synthetic, and biofortification, which play a very, very important role. Messages including things like what types of feedstuff are being fortified, what is locally available, what kind of fortificants are being used, what kind of technology is being used. All these things are things that we considered in terms of looking at how we can make recommendations. We also had to consider the fact that fortification in itself is not the silver bullet, as was said by some presenters. It is in addition to other tools such as supplementation and dietary fortification and dietary diversification. We also looked at how do we get the maximum impact? Where do we target our efforts in fortification in Africa as we move forward? And looking at really some of the projects that are already existing and the lessons that we've learned, such as through school feeding programs, which are already existing on the continent, and the first 1,000 days of life. and other social protection platforms, which are already ongoing in the African continent in different countries. And we had a lot of discussion from different countries on what they have been doing. Private sector role, huge consideration in terms of making a recommendation. The role of the private sector. The role of private sector in Africa, homegrown. We just listened to DSM, we just listened to OLAN, we know Harvest Plus, all these are already here in Africa. And we, of course, always want to look for homegrown African solutions to African problems, of which fortification is one. We are also looking at, in terms of consideration, the voices that need to be heard, the vulnerable groups in emergency and non-emergency situations, women and children in particular, and how we can target making recommendations or suggestions that can really help us to deliver to them in a more appropriate way. Recommendations regarding advocacy and partnership came up time and time again, and how we can piggyback on those partnerships in terms of looking at events or upcoming events that can help us now to advocate at a much higher and wider level. Recommendations that also looking at sharing platforms for information and data. We also looked at national strategies for fortification and continental strategies. We also looked at a clear recommendation that was recommended at the very beginning for an action plan. Can we have an action plan? Who does it? Where? When? How is it going to be generated? Other things that we considered were looking at the importance of partners. How do we look at recommendations that can include partners, academia and others, and the role of South-South collaboration, technical collaboration. We heard from India, from Brazil, we heard from Bill & Melinda Gates Foundation and others. How do we leverage this so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? We looked at recommendations that look at fortification of funding, because everything needs to be, funding of fortification. Everything needs to be funded. How do we increase budgets and allocation of budgets towards this big game-changing thing called fortification? Knowing that homegrown budgets are very important. How much are countries putting towards it themselves? And even looking at the international financial institutions and looking especially at the Africa Development Bank that we see as a homegrown funding institution, but also the World Bank and others, and the role that they're going to play. Recognizing that a return on investment is what we're looking for, a return on investment. And fortification has shown clearly by the Copenhagen consensus and many examples that we've seen throughout the last 2 days, that the return on investment is not just monetary return, but health returns, GDP impact returns, development returns is so fantastic. So I won't go into more details on this, but just to say that these are all the factors that we try to look at as the rapporteurs to try and see how we can come up now with recommendations. Can I please have the first set of slides, please, showing the recommendations, the recommendation areas. So we feel that there needs to be a very good preamble, a preamble looking at making the case for fortification now. Fortification in Africa is now, and it needs to be done quickly. It needs to be done all-inclusively and holistically. So making the case is very important. We try to look at all these various considerations I'm talking about, and we managed to group them into 6, what I will call recommendation thematic areas. The first one is looking at leadership and who takes the role, the responsibility, the ownership, the oversight. And this we know has been indirectly through the African Union and the regional economic communities, but also member states being champions and other players like the private sector and others and civil society being champions in that. So a recommendation around endorsing, supporting, and and having that accountability between the African Union and member states and pushing for fortification is very important. And for us to be able to provide evidence base for them, the political elite, to push with the clear bullets that they need to push this forward, involving ministries of finance and things like that, and decision-making and accountability. The second area that we are looking at is the African Union itself is a diplomatic, it's a policy organ. In terms of implementation, there needs to be an implementation body, a supportive facility that needs to take this forward. looking at things like roadmaps, strategic plans, a one-stop shop for data, for information, for the list of partners, where they are, what they are doing. So a recommendation area looking at creating a supportive facility to be hosted by SUR. And I bring this out because this was what was said at the opening, that SUR is already a specialized a specialized center of excellence for food and nutritional security on the African continent. So the offer was made by the Ivorian government that since it's already there and it needs now to be adopted now by the African Union through those various mechanisms as a specialized technical organ, how can we recommend that this now should be fast-tracked? The third area was looking at where do we now concentrate our efforts in terms of being smart, not reinventing the wheel, and looking at innovative platforms. So looking at the areas that we can look around that and pushing this forward, and looking at, of course, school feeding and the first 1,000 days. The next slide, please. The fourth area is looking at creating an enabling environment, okay, for policy, legal environment, okay, and financial environment for fortification efforts to thrive. Here we're looking at things like looking at regulatory body, because you can have a policy organ, the African Union there, you can have the implementers at the ground level, at state level, but in between, having the standards for fortification, the quality assurance, the quality control, the feedback, and looking at institutions which are already present, either drug agencies or food agencies. An example, of course, is the India FSSAI, NDLA, Nigeria. How do we look at this, a recommendation regarding trying to see how we can capture that very clearly so that we can push this forward? The fifth area is a recommendation that's going to come up on developing a clear action plan, a plan of action. Now, this is going to start with the proceedings or the outcome of this meeting, of this conference. Having a blueprint, what needs to go into it, and this needs to be comprehensive and have a funding strategy also attached to it. The last but not the least area that we're going to have a recommendation on, strong recommendation, is the area of partnerships, advocacy, okay? And what we can do to try to advocate more, stronger, using existing platforms and upcoming events. We know about the African Union Heads of State Summit that comes up every year in February. We know about next year being the theme of nutrition. We know about the African School Feeding Day that's coming up. We know there are so many different platforms. How do we position ourselves and package the information and target this and a recommendation along those lines? So these, we're saying we need to have input from you in terms of helping us to craft the appropriate wording to these 6 areas that cover the gamut of exactly what we've been doing for the last 2 days. Please, can I go to the next slide? This is looking at a communique. We thought that at least before we leave today, we have to come up now with a communique, which is going to represent or capture the essence of what we've been doing for the last 2 days. And this communique also has embedded in it some of the elements of the recommendations that I've just said to you. So I'll actually just read through it. We, the participants of the high-level consultation on food fortification, representatives from African countries, the African Union Commission, African regional organizations, UN organizations, development partners, civil society organizations, international financial institutions, the private sector, academia, as well as distinguished invitees, have deliberated during the last 2 days. In this deliberation, we have come up with the following. In alignment with the agreement of all nations to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, including to end all forms of malnutrition by 2030, the World Health Assembly target of a 50% reduction in anemia in women of reproductive age by 2025, Aspiration 1 of the African Union Agenda 2063, and in spirit of the African Union's upcoming Year of Nutrition 2022, reaffirming our commitment, this is our commitment, us now here over the last 2 days, towards advancing fortification in Africa. Deeply concerned about the persisting malnutrition situation in Africa, where 51% of women of reproductive age and 69% of the children aged between 6 to 59 months in Western Africa are anemic, as well as slow progress of many countries in the African sub-region in meeting the targets for anemia in women of reproductive age, recognizing the game-changing benefits of food fortification as a time-tested and cost-effective strategy to address micronutrient deficiencies with ability to piggyback on existing distribution channels and initiatives, and the potential to reach large numbers of people and to improve nutrition without requiring significant behavioral change. Commending the progress made so far. Where are we? You've commended the progress made so far on the continent, including efforts to scale up biofortification, that came out very clearly. The 27 countries that have mandates to fortify wheat flour, and many countries that fortify cooking oil and salt as part of their comprehensive nutrition strategy, as well as the slow decline in anemia, cognizant that food fortification, including biofortification, is one approach to addressing micronutrient deficiencies complementary to supplementation and promotion of dietary diversity, acknowledging the capacity of food fortification efforts to strengthen broader food systems and the importance of functioning food systems to support fortification implementation, realizing the need for greater partnerships and synergies to augment political commitment such that African Union member states take urgent and concrete actions. And finally, optimistic about the rich human and natural resources on the African continent, which can support the scale-up of food fortification. Please push down on the slide. This is where we have the essence now of our recommendations, which we are yet to fully formulate. We call upon the African Union to formally spearhead and oversee efforts to scale up food fortification in Africa, in collaboration with member states and in line with already existing continental policies, strategies, and initiatives, and for member state governments, institutions, development partners, and private sector to step forward as champions of food fortification efforts in Africa. 2, we welcome the proposal to elevate to elevate the Regional Center of Excellence Against Hunger and Malnutrition, SUR, to the status of an African Union Specialized Agency on Food and Nutrition Security, as per the request of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire to the African Union in order to, facilitate regional harmonization of policies, legal framework, and mechanisms on food fortification, and 2, to promote knowledge exchange platforms and networks to foster the dissemination and replication of good practices within the continent, and call on the African Union to fast-track this process. 3, call on African Union member states and all partners in their various capacities and mandates to prioritize actions and investments to where food fortification has the greatest potential to impact nutrition through the life cycle. Particular attention in school feeding and the critical window of the first 1,000 days of life. Number 4, we request member states to create an enabling policy, legal and financial environment for fortification efforts to thrive, including investing in capacity building of local producers so that fortification efforts foster rural transformation and stimulating the front runners of good practices in the private sector. 5, we call on SUR in collaboration with partners, for SUR cannot do this alone, to lead the development of a clear action plan with roles, responsibilities, accountability, timelines, and a funding strategy by the end of 2021. This action plan should ensure that all partners drive the fortification agenda forward in a synergistic and a sustainable way. And last but not the least, number 6, we urge for the intensification of advocacy, partnership, and knowledge sharing at the global, continental, regional and national level to accelerate food fortification, improve data collection and analysis, and sensitize stakeholders to the benefits of food fortification. This should take advantage of upcoming platforms and events such as the African Union's Heads of State Summit and the Year of Nutrition for 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, the chat box is going to be open for you to give feedback on the communique. I would like to also say that the proceedings of the report of this 2 days, we hope and anticipate that within 1 month it will be ready, plus 2 weeks maximum on top of that 1 month for translation into the various languages, as French in particular. I now bring us to the very final part, which is the expected outcomes of this 2 days. These are bulleted here. One was increased knowledge of major food fortification strategies and initiatives. Increase the knowledge. That has been done. 2, knowledge, good practices, and lessons learned are promoted. That has been done. 3, recommendations and actions made to governments, regional institutions, development partners in the private sector, and other stakeholders. We have made the bones, the thematic areas now for the recommendations, and we have gone ahead now to produce a communique to that effect. 4, an action plan on the next steps for food fortification. So we have ticked that box as well. And the very last is establishment of a network for fortification experts in Africa is initiated, which we feel that under the action plan, this will be done. This has not been easy. As you see, they'll be making some corrections also in real time. We still need to have your support from the chat box and even after this for wording of the recommendations. This has been a tremendous opportunity. And I would like to thank my team, and I would like to thank the organizers. The deliberations have been great. And I really see this, we see this as the beginning of a new day for fortification and ending micronutrient deficiencies and malnutrition in Africa. Thank you very much, Chief Moderator. I hand the reins back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amit, for this brilliant presentation on the recommendation, the conclusion, the recommendation, and the communique. Before I call on the Acting Director of CEPFAM to say some closing words, I want to share with you some of the key, what I would call key figures from this consultation. And I would like the technicians to share the screen with me and a quick analysis on the participation to these consultations. So we will start with the first slide. We have a lot of speakers coming to this meeting who have shared with us, and you could see on this map of the world how where the speakers come from. You will see a very good representations from the continent, but also speakers from Asia, America, and Europe. This simply said, we have speakers coming from all over the world to share their experience with us. The next slide, please. We have up to 500 or 600 registered to this conference, and you would see that the majority of the participants came from West Africa. But again, we have a lot of participants coming from other regions of the continent. So this chart simply shows you the diversity in terms of the regions on the continent and outside the continent from where we got our participants. Next slide, please. Also, we have a diversity in terms of institutional representations, either from the development agency, the government agency, the international institutions, the NGOs, the private sector, the regional institutions, UN agency, university, and research knowledge centers, and the media. You can also see from the chart where we had our participants coming from in terms of institutions. Next slide, please. Here, we try to analyze how our participant, or the participant to this meeting, how did they got the information about these consultations. And you would see here, we have done a quick analysis, and most of the participants were invited, but almost half of the participants got the information from various sources, either through Google search, newsletters, websites, social media, mouth to mouth. So you can see that it's really 50-50 from invitations and 50 coming from other sources. They heard about the information from their own search. The next slide, please. Here is another pictogram showing why did people decide to participate. Why did people decide to participate? And you would see that the majority, almost 75%, came here because of the professional motivations. They did not just come here because they want to attend a conference, but they are here because they want to learn and go back and apply, because this is in line with what they do every day, and they really want to see how the lessons that they will get from this consultation could help the work that they will be doing when they are back in their various institutions. The next slide, please. Now, we try to look at the people who register for the consultations. And if you recall, we had some questions when you were registering, your areas of interest. What do you expect at the end of the consultation? And you will see that the first diagram shows you the number of people who came to access additional knowledge and best practices on what is going on at national level. The second shows you the number of people who came here because they wanted to learn about have a better understanding on the food fortification programs and strategy. The third one wanted really to learn about effective management of the food fortification program. And the fourth one, and this is quite interesting to see that a lot of people came here because they wanted at the end of this consultation to formulate concrete recommendations to government and to other stakeholders. So you can see, and I hope from the conclusion made by Dr. Hamid that we all have gotten what we came here or what we ought to gain from this meeting. The next. And this is a slide just showing the thematic areas of interest, and you would see it was quite equal, but the majority really wanted to understand, to know more about the mapping, the trend, and the challenges and opportunities on food fortification on the continent. If not, all the participants have the same interest on all the subjects that were discussed during the last 2 days. I think this is the last slide. And with this, I want us to move to the last session, which is the closing session. And before I call on our guest of honor, who will provide the final remark, I would like to invite the Acting Director of SEPTEMBRE, Mr. Patrick Tezera, to give us some final word before the meeting is closed. Patrick, you have the floor. Patrick, your mic is closed. Your mic is closed. Can you open? You are muted. Patrick, votre micro. Est-ce que vous pouvez ouvrir le micro? On ne vous écoute pas.
Sorry, Dr. Simplis, just 1 minute.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Simplis, for doing an amazing job of taking us through this journey. It's been a journey for us from the start. We did believe in this high-level consultation. After 2 days, we feel like the organizers of this consultation, you name them, the government of Côte d'Ivoire, the World Food Programme, and very importantly, the African Union Commission, through its diverse divisions, but also the West Africa Health Organization, did a good job in bringing together these high-level consultations. So I feel reassured that food fortification is on the right track, and we look forward as organizer to being of help in really pushing this important agenda forward. With this word, Dr. Simplis, I would like to pass the floor back to you so we can have the official closing remarks by our distinguished guest, Honorable Minister of Health of the Government of Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you very much all.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, comme il est de coutume à la fin d'un atelier ou d'une consultation de haut niveau comme celui-ci, nous devons suivre un discours de clôture et ce discours de clôture sera prononcé par le ministre de la Santé de la Côte d'Ivoire qui nous a fait l'honneur de nous rejoindre à ce moment. Excellences, Monsieur le ministre, vous avez la parole.
Merci. Monsieur le directeur régional de l'Afrique de l'Ouest du Centre du Programme alimentaire mondial, Son Excellence Madame l'ambassadeur commissaire de l'Union africaine chargée de l'agriculture, du développement rural, de l'économie bleue et de l'environnement durable, Monsieur le Président de l'Union interparlementaire, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des organisations internationales et nationales, partenaires de la lutte contre la malnutrition, Mesdames et Messieurs. Je voudrais remercier tous les participants, l'ensemble des partenaires engagés dans la lutte contre la malnutrition pour les échanges riches et ouverts que nous avons eus pendant ces 2 jours de concertation. La participation des experts de haut niveau nous a permis d'apprécier l'état des lieux et de l'enrichissement des aliments en Afrique et de réaffirmer les initiatives pour accéder à la lutte contre les carences en micronutriments. Les discussions et échanges ont été fructueux, montrant les étapes que nous avons déjà franchies et partager les efforts à fournir pour parfaire la stratégie d'enrichissement des aliments en Afrique, si nous voulons réduire les principales carences identifiées. Mesdames et Messieurs, nos États se sont engagés, conformément aux orientations continentales et sous-régionales, pour une nutrition optimale et saine des populations. Nous nous félicitons des programmes accomplis, mais les résultats sont différents selon les pays et les défis persistent pour lutter efficacement et durablement contre les carences en micronutriments. Ces 2 jours de réflexion nous ont permis d'apprécier la situation des carences dans nos pays respectifs et partager plusieurs expériences et bonnes pratiques, y compris avec le Brésil, l'Inde et la Chine. Les leçons apprises et les résultats obtenus nous permettent de nous projeter pour identifier les interventions pour une lutte efficace. À cet effet, une nouvelle initiative voit le jour, à savoir l'intégration d'autres véhicules de grande consommation pour son enrichissement en micronutriments. Les experts ont identifié le riz, dont le processus d'enrichissement a fait l'objet d'échanges riches en enseignements et innovations prometteuses. Ce choix nécessitera l'engagement de l'ensemble des parties prenantes dans le secteur privé, les organisations de la société civile et les partenaires techniques et financiers. Mesdames et messieurs, nous devons vous féliciter pour de notre détermination contre les carences en micronutriments à travers des politiques et directives adaptées pour l'enrichissement des aliments. Je salue les conclusions, notamment les recommandations issues de ces réflexions. Elles doivent être partagées dans nos différents États qui doivent les adopter et la Côte d'Ivoire endosse la responsabilité de ces engagements, mais surtout travaillera à faire aboutir les différentes recommandations à l'intérieur de la discussion et des dialogues nécessaires au sein du gouvernement. Elle doit faire l'objet d'une diffusion plus large pour une appropriation régionale et continentale, pour une réglementation plus forte et plus efficace des marchés. Les mesures fortes du communiqué final devront guider nos actions futures dans un cadre d'action pertinente. Au terme de mes propos, je adresse mes félicitations et remerciements à la Commission africaine pour l'agriculture, le développement rural, l'économie bleue et l'environnement durable, à l'Organisation ouest-africaine de la santé, ainsi qu'au Programme alimentaire mondial pour l'organisation des présentes assises aux côtés de la Côte d'Ivoire. Mes remerciements vont également à l'endroit des pays participants et à l'ensemble des experts. Finalement, mes remerciements vont au SER femmes pour l'organisation de la coordination des échanges. C'est sur ces mots que je déclare clos la consultation de haut niveau sur l'enrichissement des aliments. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Merci beaucoup, Excellence, pour ces mots de clôture et surtout cet engagement que la Côte d'Ivoire prend à appuyer, à mettre en œuvre les recommandations de cet atelier et nous espérons que les autres États membres suivront l'exemple de la Côte d'Ivoire. Merci encore, Monsieur le ministre. Je voudrais, avant qu'on se quitte, remercier des gens qui ont facilité la communication. Nous avons utilisé au cours de cette consultation plusieurs langues, bien que nous avions l'impression que nous parlions tous français ou anglais, mais il y avait du français mélangé au bambara ou de l'anglais mélangé au kiswahili. Et s'il n'y avait pas ces interprètes, je pense qu'on n'aurait pas pu communiquer. Je voudrais remercier sincèrement, au nom de l'équipe d'organisation, les interprètes qui ont facilité la communication durant cet atelier, cette consultation. Je voudrais remercier toute l'équipe derrière, l'équipe technique qui a facilité la préparation et la tenue de cet atelier. Je voudrais remercier tout le monde et vous dire, on se revoit d'ici peu pour le point et pour les autres activités qui seront organisées conjointement, et encore, et je le pense, par la Côte d'Ivoire, le CERFAM, la Commission de l'Union africaine, l'Organisation régionale de la santé pour l'Afrique de l'Ouest et d'autres partenaires pour pouvoir promouvoir la fortification des aliments sur le continent. Merci beaucoup, bon après-midi et à très bientôt. Au revoir.